Hello? Anybody gonna come back? We have one person. Come back, come back. Oh, now you left. Now you're back. Who is it? Say hi. Say hi. Don't be shy. We're gonna finish this. Hey, Sour Milk, you made it back. See if anybody else comes. Oh, 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 oh. Help me. Come back. Come back. Helen, man, you're back. Hey, you're back. Okay, let's work on this story again. You're back, Julie. You found your... I love that face. I know I need to stop the other one, but I'll just wait till this is over because I couldn't get it to stop. It doesn't want to stop. Okay, we're going to continue on. Okay, Charlie pulled out a soaking wet piece of cloth, hardly protected from the weather. I know it was weird. By the bag. But it was all we had. I wrapped the man in as well as I could and lifted him up over my shoulder. Dad, what if he's like the others? Charlie asked nervously. He can't be. He looks too healthy. Help me carry my things while I carry him. We have to get back to the shelter fast. We rushed back towards the ruin we'd called home for the past day. It only took an hour to walk through the storm, but in my fragile state, carrying someone as heavy as that man put me on the brink of collapse. Once we finally reached the house, I dropped the man on the driest part of the floor I could find and started a futile attempt at making a fire while Charlie unpacked our things. Dad, I'm going to look for food, Charlie stated, oddly confident. He'd become a resourceful kid, but I had little hope we'd find any treasure. Whoever lived there before had to have emptied the place during the second evacuation. Thank you, Sour Milk. Don't bother. We already looked through this place. As a stubborn kid, he reminded me of his mother, always adamant about finding solutions where there were none. Against my advice, he set off to search the house once more. After a good half an hour, I managed to get a few sparks to ignite a fire. Charlie returned just in time, holding a few cans of beans and a couple of water bottles. Where'd you find these? I asked, equally impressed and surprised. Found them under some planks in the closet, he said, smiling. People had gotten clever during the storm as food supplies grew short and we lost contact with the outside world. People got serious about hiding their most valuable belongings, and in a world where nothing ever grew, where food couldn't be made, gold and money had lost their purpose. You did good, Charlie. I'm proud of you. The man grunted, starting to wake up. What happened? He asked weakly. I knelt down beside him, trying my best to keep him calm. Don't worry, you're safe, I said. What's your name? Peter. Great. Peter, my name is John. Do you know where you are? No, I was just out walking, he groaned. My head, it really hurts. I noticed a gash on the back of his head, covered by his hair. It had stopped bleeding, but it was a nasty cut in risk of getting infected. Was I in an accident? Why am I not in a hospital? He asked. Hospital? I asked, confused. Before he could continue, he passed back out. I tried to get him to drink some water, most of which he coughed up. Keeping him warm and hydrated was all I could do while he recovered. Asking for a hospital, he must have been pretty out of it, I mumbled to myself. I turned back to Charlie. He was enjoying his expired can of beans, our first meal in 2 days. Hardly a feast, but that didn't matter. We need to get sleep soon, Charlie. We've got a long trek ahead of us tomorrow. Wait, tell me the story first, he demanded. It was a story I'd told 1,000 times in the past few years. One of the times before the storm. A story about a world Charlie was far too young to remember, but he'd seen a minuscule part of it, and I wanted to keep that glimpse alive, if only as a distant dream. You want to hear about the sun? I asked. He nodded happily. All right, come sit with me. Let's try to get dry before we pass out for the night. We huddled up under the blanket, almost dry from the fire, and for the 1,001st time, I told him about the past. You know the sky is blue. Beyond the darkness and thick clouds we see outside, there's a whole other world without rain, without thunder and lightning. And in the center of it all, we have the sun. It's a bright yellow ball hanging up there, watching over us, keeping us warm. Even now it's giving us life, but it's not as strong as it used to be. It's hidden like an invaluable treasure. Many years ago, we lived in the sun with your mother. We were so happy. I paused for a moment, talking about my wife was a hard task considering how we lost her. Charlie didn't remember, of course, but it stung deep inside my chest, like a cold hand wrapping around my aching heart. I sighed before I continued. She loved taking us out to the beach, endless oceans and soft sand beneath our feet. It was so warm and so bright that we had to eat ice cream just to cool down. Sometimes we even wanted to get wet. We dove into the water, but it wasn't dark and grimy. It was crystal clear, blue like the color of your eyes. But it's all gone now, isn't it? I'm sure it's out there somewhere, and I promise you, as soon as we can find a way past the Guardians, I'll take you there. You'll see the sun again, Charlie. I promise. I talked more about his mother until he fell asleep. As much as it pained me, I felt it important that he knew what a wonderful woman she was. As night fell over us, the storm worsened, turning from heavy rain to a murderous blizzard. As usual, I found it hard to sleep, always worrying the house might collapse, as so many buildings had. But Charlie slept blissfully, too young to comprehend the true dangers of the world. Ice cream, yes. Are they? I wonder if I can. Can you tell them to come back here? To come over here? I wonder if I can do that on my phone somehow. Hey, Justin, let me see if I can get over there on my phone and stop it. I was trying. Where'd it go? Let me try. I don't see it still there. You guys sure? Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not there. It says, stop. Stop it, video. No, should not. Stop it. Yeah, it says it's ended. No, you're not hated. Oh, I look like I could be a shadow person, don't I? Okay, it's gone. All right. Okay. Let's get back to the story. Dad. Whisper. Okay, thank you, Julie. Oh, stop it, video. Dad, the man is waking up. I awoke to Charlie shaking me. Though I was usually a light sleeper, I somehow barely came to, even as Charlie yelled. Peter was coughing, begging for water. After spending the whole night unconscious, he was finally coming back to it. Water, please, he said. I helped him sit up to drink. How are you feeling? Oh man, I'm still here. I thought it was all a dream, he said as he looked around the room. Are we in an abandoned house or something? Well, Peter, it's not abandoned anymore, I joked, stupidly trying to brighten up the mood. Shouldn't I be in a hospital? He asked again. I was confused, but he'd suffered a fairly traumatic head injury, so I let his questions slide while I started breakfast. I cooked up some beans and offered them to Peter. Without supplies, I couldn't do much for his wound, only observe and hope a fever didn't fester. Do you know where we are? I asked, trying to get an idea of his state of mind. I don't know. I don't remember anything other than walking around. I was heading for a picnic, I think. Then there was a bright flash, and next thing I knew I woke up here. A picnic? Yeah, it's been the warmest summer in years. They say I wanted, they say, yeah, it's been the warmest summer in years, they say. I wanted to enjoy the weather, but by the look of that rain outside, I guess that didn't last very long. Warm summer, picnics, it had become clear how confused he really was. We're in Greenville, I said. Greenville? I've never heard that name. I come from Portland. Portland wasn't anywhere nearby. The closest town over would have been Clint, but God knows what still existed beyond the boundaries of our hellhole. And you have sun in Portland? Yeah, blazing, burning sun every day for the past month. For a moment, I considered the fact that the world had kept going long after our city's demise, that despite our hardship, there existed a better place where life thrived. Yet I knew leaving would be impossible. You tell me the world is still going? That outside of this shit, whoops, whoop, shite, people are just living normal lives? Of course, we never even heard about a storm destroying a city. No one knows about Greenville. This is all a bit bizarre. I stood up and paced around the room, a thousand thoughts and ideas flowing through my mind. The world hadn't ended, It was only us, only our city, closed off from the rest of the world and left to suffer. People couldn't leave, but then again, none had entered it either. Since the fall of our city and collapse of the colony, Peter was the first seemingly healthy human we'd stumbled across. If he could get in, then maybe, just maybe, we could get out. Dad, there's a woman outside, Charlie yelled from one of the windows, breaking me away from my brainstorm. Stay back, Charlie, I demanded as I rushed outside, Peter getting up and following suit. The rain poured as always, filling up a smaller sinkhole down the end of the street. Most houses had long since collapsed, and those that still stood were slowly being etched by the acid. A woman stood in the middle of the street with her back facing towards us. She wore nothing more than a light dress, hardly providing protection from the horrific weather. She'd been hurt, leaving an exposed wound on her left shoulder, no longer bleeding, but oozing with thick yellow pus. I did say a bad word. What the hell is she doing just standing there? Peter asked. Don't get close. Let me deal with it, I responded. I walked up behind the woman. The veins on her arm were protruding out, marking an infection that was growing up towards her neck. Oh, she was on the brink of sepsis and would soon perish. Without hesitating, I pulled her head back by her hair. As I did, I also lifted up my hunting knife and slit her throat. Ew. I'm sorry, I whispered, as blood poured down her newly created orifice. She didn't even react, as she quickly bled out. Seconds later, she had died. Holy shite! What the F did you just do? Peter yelled from the house. He stood frozen in fear, staring at my bloody hands. He didn't understand what I had just done. It then dawned on me that Peter truly came from a better place, one without the daily horrors we faced. I set her free, I responded, already out of breath. Peter turned to run, but I gave chase. Despite my malnourished body and wasted frame, I was far faster in the rain and quickly pinned him down. Let me go, you're crazy, he yelled. Calm down, Peter. I can explain. Explain what? You just straight up murdered someone, he continued. I let him go, causing him to slip onto the muddy, wet ground. I kept my knife pointed at him, forcing him to stick around a little longer. You really don't know what's going on here, do you? I asked. Please, don't kill me. Just tell me what the F you want. Of course I won't kill you. You're not empty. Not like them. Not yet. I flipped my knife around, gesturing for Peter to take it. Now that I'm unarmed, you're going to listen. He took the knife, clutching onto it with shaking hands. It put me in harm's way, but I felt safe nonetheless. Peter wasn't from around Greenville. He'd been sheltered, safe from the nightmare that had been our lives for the past years, meaning that he still didn't have murder in his heart. Why did you kill her? He asked with a shaky voice. Because she was already dead, the parts of her that matter anyway. You notice the wound on her arm? Her clear apathy towards it? It's because she's one of them, one of the empty people. What do you mean, empty people? I walked back over to the corpse of the thing I just killed, turning her over to see her face, full of scratches, even an eye missing, probably from walking into walls and debris laying around. It's the rain, I said calmly, while presenting the wounds of someone who'd clearly given up on their own well being. It changes people, hollows them out, taking away their memories, stripping them of all emotion. That's the fate of most people living in this city. And whatever they once were, accountants, mechanics, doctors, they ain't anymore. All they do now is walk around, get hurt, and die. Then why kill them? Because they're already gone. Only their bodies stay behind to suffer. The least we can do is free them. Besides, they get riled up if disturbed. Sometimes they get violent. He lowered his guard by then, either from believing my story or because he simply didn't have much of a choice. Peter was trapped alongside us in the storm, unable to survive without my help. But unbeknownst to him, he could be our ticket out of here. How long have you been here? Was all he asked. 7 years. Peter collapsed to the ground in disbelief, fearing he'd suffer the same fate. I walked over and put a comforting hand on his shoulder, mustering as much confidence as I could into the next few words. But now we're all getting out of here together. My plan was simple enough in theory. Follow the river and retrace its path back towards where it grabbed Peter. It might have given us a safe way past the guardians lurking in the dark territory. While we got ready for the day's trek, I felt hopeful. For the first time in about 6 years, I truly believed we stood a chance. During the early days of the storm, we'd all been a part of mass evacuation. As the first buildings fell to sinkholes created by the downpour, people started to panic. The evacuation itself was a shite show. Thousands of cars immediately congesting on the highway. As a last resort, we attempted to flee on foot, with the pitch black clouds looming above us, striking down with lightning every so often, seeming to appear from the ground itself. My family and I were quite far in the back, and when reaching the border out of the city, we halted in our steps. Before us lay thousands of skinless bodies, entire families embraced in death, with horrified expressions on their flayed faces. Ew. In the blink of an eye, well over 100,000 people had been slaughtered, repurposed for a meat wall, spanning around the entire city, keeping us trapped. The mere fact that Peter got inside ignited a fresh wave of hope throughout my body. It meant there had to be a weak spot in the dark territory, one we could escape through. Charlie presented us with a few water bottles he'd found while searching the neighboring houses. It wasn't much to keep us going, but I'd found a new source of motivation. So we're leaving the city? Peter asked. That's right. If a better place exists, I have to get my son there. Mind me asking why you haven't left already? I mean, this place isn't all that great. Because it's dangerous, Peter. People have tried and died. What makes you so sure we'll survive then? He asked, looking at me with a mix of fear and confusion. Because now we know it's possible. You got in. That means we can get out. A few more bodies had landed on the riverbank where we found Peter the day before. Unlike him, they were beyond saving, flayed and mutilated like all the others. Peter looked at them in disbelief and disgust, unable to believe the horrors that lay before him. What happened to them? He asked. Those are the people that tried to leave, I said. Helen. Justin, I don't know what's going on, but yeah, please be respectful. The title has creepy, not creeper. Yeah, I hope so. And that's where we're heading, he continued, panicked. Listen to me, Peter. There's no food, no water, nothing left in this city for us. We either take our chances here or we die from thirst and starvation in the city. Remember that you made it in here, and I promise you a better chance if we keep going. We followed the river upstream, half a day's trek, just to get to the bridge. The rest would be spent crossing it. Glad you made it, Mary. The bridge was the name given to a collection of sinkholes spanning all around the city, 96 miles wide and 2 miles across, a place of destruction, almost impossible to pass. A section of the sinkholes had been covered in various debris, cars, and corpses, giving it the unfitting name, filling it to the brim, to the point where we could cross, hence a bridge. Despite its dangerous content, it would be our safest route to the other side. Of course, the empty people lurked around the bridge as well, but they were different. Those that existed there still had the basic instinct of escaping, making them far more terrifying than anything found within the city limits. I let my mind wander as we slowly walked by the river. The monotonous flow of water against the harsh trickle of rain was somehow soothing. It brought back memories of the second evacuation and the first empty people. I saw an image of myself holding on to my 3-year-old son with one arm and my wife with the other. We were crushed in the middle of a panicking crowd when my wife, Loretta, suddenly let go. I tried so desperately to grab a hold of her again, but she simply stood there, letting the crowd trample her down as we were pulled away. She was left behind, one of the first people to forget themselves, to hollow out and become one of the empty people. Most people could feel it coming on. They knew that they were about to turn, but not her. For whatever reason, it happened within seconds. Following the second failed evacuation, we searched for weeks, hundreds of colonists looking for their lost loved ones, but to no avail. Loretta was more than likely one of the empties that wandered into harm's way, dying from their own neglect. Dad, what are you doing? Charlie asked as I snapped back to reality. I had stopped moving, lost in my own thoughts, unable to react with the outside world. Dad! John! Peter chimed in. Finally, I managed to get myself going. I'm sorry. I just needed to catch my breath. I lied. Let's keep moving. Another hour, and we finally reached the bridge. Before us, we saw an endless collection of sinkholes, partially filled with solid debris. Dozens of bodies littered the pits, among a few surviving stragglers. This isn't exactly what I had in mind when you said we had to cross a bridge, Peter said. The river ran straight through the sinkholes, dragging parts of its foundation with it. We had to keep a certain distance away from the river, lest we get dragged away with everything else. This is more like a hole, if I'm entirely honest, he continued. I kneeled down beside my son. This would be his first time crossing the bridge without my help. On each prior crossing, he'd been too young, and I had carried him on my back or had him wait back at the colony. Now that the colony was gone and I was too weak to carry him, he'd have to manage on his own. You ready to do this, Charlie? I asked. He nodded, as brave as he'd ever been. Listen, there's bound to be a bunch of empty people stuck in the debris. It's going to be dangerous. These empties are different from the ones we've seen in the city. They'll call out for help. They'll beg and bargain, but don't let that fool you. There's no fear, sadness, or anger in their voices. There'll be no urgency, even as they lay there, bleeding out. So, whatever happens, do not approach them, I said, looking back and forth between Peter and Charlie. They both nodded, confused but diligent. We tied a rope between the three of us. Walking 10 feet apart would ensure that if one of us fell into a pit or sank into the unstable ground, the other two could pull them back up. Charlie, being the lightest, walked at the back of our small group while I led the charge. It only took a couple of 100 feet before we saw one of the empty people trapped in a crushed car, emaciated and pale, probably stuck there for the past year, waiting for someone to pass. Oh, sorry, Charlie. She's a flat. It pleaded and begged for us to help, asking in the most apathetic voice possible, completely rid of any emotion. Don't don't go to the other side without me. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, it said. Another one we passed had just impaled itself on a piece of debris, bleeding profusely. Within an hour, it would be dead, yet it kept talking as if nothing had happened. Its words made sense, but the emotion behind them proved non existent. Hey, take me with you, please, please, please. It doesn't hurt, I promise. It doesn't hurt. I'll be okay. I'll be okay. Peter looked with concern at the trapped creatures, worried and sorry about its pitiful fate. Let it be, I ordered. We can't help them. He complied, and we kept walking. John, how about you tell me how all of this happened? Peter asked. I shrugged his curiosity off. It wasn't a memory I wanted to dig into. We're better off focusing on the rough terrain. We ain't got time to talk, I shot back. All right, how about a short summary then? I sighed, already out of breath from the rough trek across the bridge, ignoring him initially, but he kept prying. He wasn't going to let it go. They said the storm would pass in the week, I finally uttered, after about the 10th time he asked. We did as we were told, holding up inside our homes, stocking up on food and water as the worst passed. Only it never did, and after a month of the acidic rain etching away at our once friendly city, buildings started collapsing, sinkholes swallowed the roads, and people died. I sat down on a rock, trying to catch my breath. Talking while wandering was a painful task. Oh no, really? It's doing it again. Let's see. Then the people started acting strange. We'd find men, women, and children just wandering through the streets at night, wearing nothing more than their nightgowns to protect them from the pouring rain. They had this look in their eyes, as if they weren't aware enough to care about their surroundings. Sometimes they'd even get hurt, break a leg, or rupture an artery, yet they just kept walking aimlessly around, ignoring our pleas to just come back inside. Peter stepped in front of me. That's what happened to your colony? He asked. Our colony was formed after the first 6 months. We'd gathered as many resources as we could, non-perishable foods and water. Since only 1,000 people survived the first 2 evacuations, we figured we'd be fine for a few years at least, but the rain kept pouring. We'd lost contact with the outside world, and anyone brave enough to venture into the dark zone ended up dead. We were trapped, scared, and running out of supplies faster than anticipated. You know what happens when there's no system to keep people in place? Peter shook his head. I got back up on my feet and we kept moving. Well, let's say the empty people weren't the only ones losing their sense of self. A small group of empty people started getting close. They'd miraculously navigated across the bridge without getting impaled or hurt by the various debris. They kept mumbling nonsense as they walked. The only word I could make out was salvation. Hi, Justina. Let him be, I demanded. Peter kept inquiring about our situation. Oh, I see. Never mind, Justina. So you've been stuck here for the past 7 years, he asked. That's right, 7 years since the storm began in 2022. Oh, and this book is like 9 years old or something. That's weird that it just said 2022. What the hell do you mean, 2022? The year. What else? I asked, confused. You saying the storm started 7 years ago? In 2021? Making the current year 2029? By my estimation, yeah. It's been a bit hard to keep track, but I'm pretty sure we're either in July or August. Why do you ask? John, it's only 2021. I chuckled at the absurd statement. Listen, Peter, you hit your head pretty hard. It's understandable that look at me, John. I was born in 1995. Do I look like I'm in my mid-30s? He asked. He didn't. He looked like someone in their early 20s, just like I thought when I first found him. Yet it made no sense. If it truly was that long ago for him, then it meant he'd traveled not only from outside, but from the past. You really think you traveled through time? I asked, sounding more condescending than intended. Well, is that less likely than a storm lasting 7 years, people turning empty, and mysterious guardians hindering any escape? He asked back. Despite my disbelief in his statement, he had a point. But that means I stopped. Means what, John? It means the world truly is gone. Then how did I get here? He said, getting more agitated by the minute. I don't know, but the plan stays the same. We keep moving across the bridge. Towards what? Certain death? To be flayed by the guardians? Like the pile of corpses back at the river? I don't know, I shouted back, loud enough to attract the attention of the passing empty people, most stuck in the debris by then. Peter got quiet. But do you have a better plan? There's no food left, no water, nothing. You want to go back? We'll die before we find shelter again. So my plan remains. We're following the river, and while we do, we desperately pray to any God you can think of that we somehow manage to find out how the hell you ended up here. He just stared at me. 7 years, Peter, my son grew up not knowing the warmth of the sun, and I'll die before he gets stuck here for the rest of his life. While I frantically yelled in anger, one of the empty people got close enough to grab Charlie. I had lost focus and just stared at him in complete apathy. For a moment, it didn't matter what happened next. Help me, help me, help me. Let's stick together, 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 it begged as I pulled him towards a pit. As it pulled him towards a pit, I just stared. Dad, help me, Charlie cried, but I stared on, unable to make myself move. Good night, LMN. We're almost done. Sounds pleasant. Almost done. John, what the hell are you doing? Peter shouted as he ran over to help Charlie. Finally, I snapped back to reality, immediately pulling my knife out, pushing the creature away from my son while impaling it through its eye. As it fell over dead, Charlie cried for the first time in years, and Peter turned to me with an angry expression on his face. John, why did you just stand there? He shouted. I don't know. I rushed over to console Charlie, but he pushed me away. I just lost myself for a moment. I can't explain it. We didn't have time to discuss it. Darkness loomed over us as nightfall approached. After catching our breaths once more, we rushed the last few hundred feet across. We desperately needed to find shelter before another blizzard set in. No sooner had we set foot on the edge of the bridge than a brilliantly bright light appeared on the horizon. It was unlike anything I'd seen since the beginning of the storm, appearing as blue sun, lighting up everything around us. The light looked cold as ice, yet it warmed us more than anything had for the past 7 years. The river stretched all the way towards the light, and I knew in my heart that Peter had somehow come through it. Is that the sun? Charlie asked hopefully. No, that's something else entirely, I responded, baffled by the magnificent sight. How far away is it? Peter asked. I tried to the best of my ability to judge the distance, but the shine of the light made it hard to get a clear view. If it lay just by one of the bodies of water making up the river, it would be another day's trek, meaning we'd have to venture through the dark territory. I'm guessing another day and a half's walk, I finally said. They both seemed, boy, this one's long. This one's a long, short story. Hopefully it's close to the end. They both seemed hopeful. The terrain itself wasn't as rough as the rest of the trip, but I was beginning to realize I might not make it that far. In any case, we'll need to find shelter. We're not traversing the dark territory at night. We searched for an hour before finding a partially collapsed warehouse. Not a great cover for the oncoming blizzard, but it was the best we could do in the outskirts of town. I lit a fire for the night and shared the last can of beans. I'm sorry about earlier, I said to Charlie. It's okay, Charlie said, half asleep. Can you tell me a story? That night, as Charlie fell asleep for the first time, I told him a story about the future and not the past. I love you. Be good, kid. I remained awake, staring into the embers as the blizzard raged outside. My mind wandered. I tried to keep it focused, but to no avail. I saw images of my wife, memories of digging sandcastles on the beach with Charlie, flashes of wine and dances, the past of a better life. I was tired, worn down to the bone, hollowed out by the rain, like so many people before me. In a matter of hours, my mind would be lost, and my son would be left alone, fending for himself with someone who clearly didn't belong. Without waking the other two, I sat down to write the final part of my journal. I've kept track of most events during the past 7 years, but I feel like the last few days are the most important. I'm leaving this to you, Peter. When you find me empty in the morning, I need you to take Charlie with you across the dark territory. Bring him to the light and cross over to a better world. You might even have the chance to stop this all from happening. Charlie, I love you. Be good and live a happier life in the sun. I wish I could be there with you until the end, but my time is up. You deserve so much more than this world has given you, and now you might finally have it. Good luck to you both, John. When morning rolled around, John had left, either to keep us safe or because he'd hollowed out and gone to face the rain one last time. He pulled me out of the river. He saved my life. And in return, I promised to keep Charlie safe. He left behind his journal, which is what you've all just read. And while there's a lot more to mine and Charlie's story, I felt this should be what I post first. John deserved that much. I awoke in the early hours the following morning. Charlie was frantically calling out for his father. John had left his bed and seemingly vanished, leaving his journal neatly placed by my bedside. We searched the warehouse before I even checked what John had written, but he wasn't inside. I picked up the journal and opened it. I only needed to read the first few lines to realize what had happened. John had turned empty and left instructions to me, telling me to save Charlie. Dad, Charlie yelled as he stormed out the door, back into the rain. John was standing motionless outside, staring towards the horizon. He didn't even react to Charlie's plea for attention. Dad, what are you doing? He continued, on the verge of tears. He walked towards John, though whatever John had been just a day before, he had been washed away by the heavy rainfall. Charlie, stay away from John, I yelled as I ran over to grab him. Let me go, he said as he tried to wriggle himself loose from my grip. Dad, he cried. John hadn't moved, not even acknowledging our presence. No, he kept screaming as I pulled him back inside the warehouse and shut the door. I just scared myself by seeing myself there. Just scared me. He was incredibly strong for a 10-year-old, but I kept him at bay while he cried and punched me. He's gone, Charlie. John is gone. No, he isn't. He can't be. He promised. He continued sobbing incomprehensibly. I held him tight and let him cry it out, and he eventually stopped resisting my grip. The one person in his life had been taken away for no reason other than bad luck, simply wasted away in a world where humanity had become little more than a faint memory. Charlie sat by the fire, reading John's journal. He silently sobbed as he turned the pages. He learned to read from his father, and he'd written the journal as a reminder of what they had gone through, in hopes that one day someone would save them. I'm sorry about your dad, Charlie. He didn't respond. I packed what little things we had into John's bag. We had to keep walking while we still had the energy. Without food or water, this would be our last day, whether we found salvation or not. When we finally got back outside, John had wandered off. How long is this short story going? Holy cow. What the heck? Come on now. This one's going on too long. We're going to call it quits and we will finish this next time. The first story was short, right? I'm getting really tired, and I hope some of you are too. Ew. Lake of human skin. Okay, guys. Yes, part 2. I know, whisper. This has been going on for quite a while, right? This short, quote unquote, story. I've already read I read one to you guys. The first one was super short. Earlier today in the car, I read 2 or 3 real short ones from here. I didn't know this was going on and on and on. So yeah, we're gonna finish it later. Okay, part 2 cliffhanger. It'll be part 3 cliffhanger. Right, guys? Oh, Mary. Thank you, Mary, for coming. I really appreciate it. You're so sweet. Okay, guys, thanks for coming. Yes, remember, we'll have the cliffhanger on the next episode. Bye, guys. See ya. Thank you.